find out my dad's not. He won't feast on human lives like we do. Leave that as the opening line of the show.
Oh, God.
Stuff you wish you could leave in editing.
Oh, boy. And on that note, welcome to Tom's 10. Oh, wait. Hey, guys, you know how professional we are. So I'm just going to leave that shit in because I find it funny. But if I don't want to leave that in, this is Tom's 10 Champions You Need to Know. It's another late night edition here because me and Tom are busy as all fuck, and we have crazy lives.
Always.
Oh yeah. Tom just coming back from training, practice. What do you call it?
Either or.
All right. So Tom's 10 Champions You Need to Know. These are not the regular Mount Rushmore guys that you like. It's not the Hulk and Austin Rock. These are the guys who have changed the business for the better in their own time. This is going back a little bit. Some of them you know, some of them you may not. But it's just going to be fun like always, talking about this. Tom did all the research, of course, because my research ability is wing it. But you can't really do that in situations like this. So how's the day going, man?
Not too bad. This has definitely been my most extensively researched edition to date. Got to learn about the history of radio. It's part of this one. And yeah, this is 10 champions you need to know. I'm not saying these are the greatest champions of all time, although number one I'm going to say probably is. But yeah, the Mount Rushmore of wrestling I've heard everybody saying Rock, Austin, Undertaker, Jericho, Hulk, Ric Flair. And not to say that, those guys and John Cena, Chris aren't great champions, but everybody knows both of them. And some of these other people that weren't even mentioned is a travesty, because these guys literally changed or revolutionized the business, or in some cases made the business. So 10 champions you need to know. Number one.
Oh, are these in any particular order, or just 10 champs you need to know?
Probably the top three are going to be the top three, I could argue, but for this one, they're not particularly in order, just 10 you definitely need to know. Although number one is, I say, the greatest champion of all time, with Lou Thesz. 3-time NWA champion, 15-time overall world champion around the world.
Oh, wow.
Lou Thesz had the longest reign of any NWA champion. We're going to put some of these reigns in perspective for people. Everybody remembers, other great champions. CM Punk, 438 days.
Yeah.
Current NWA champion Nick Aldis, if he can hang on to it till the end of the year, will be 428 days.
Oh, wow.
Even everybody remembers other great guys, but like The Rock. The Rock's first title reign was only 50 days. Sergeant Slaughter, everybody remembers Sergeant Slaughter, world champion, 64 days. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, big time NWA champion, 76 days. The Cadet, famous CWO champion, 77 days. 1 day more than Ricky Steamboat. But even Stone Cold, his longest reign was 175 days. Dusty Rhodes' longest was only 88 days.
Wow.
Dusty Short's reign was 5 days. So, and even over in Japan, Kazuchika Okada, longest reigning IWGP champion of all of the modern era at all time, 720 days. So, Lou Thesz, longest reigning NWA champion of all time, 2,300 days. November 27th, 1949 through March 15th, 1956.
Wow.
So that is 7.5 years, to skip you all some math. And that is scarily, that is only the second longest title reign of all time. However, Lou's combined 3 NWO title reigns combined to 3,749 days for 10 years, 3 months, and 9 days as the NWA champion. He had a 58-year career, wrestling actively from 1932 until 1990, when at the age of 74, he challenged Masahiro Chono. He was 46 the third time he won the NWA championship, and he held on to it for a couple years. His final run when he was the UWA champion in 1978 at the age of 62, and he held on to the title for a year.
Well, would you want to wrestle Lou Thesz even at the age of 62?
No, not at all. In addition to being a sheer badass man in wrestling, in World War II, he taught hand-to-hand combat to battlefield medics, and was probably one of the most famous wrestlers of all time in the golden age of television. He was on television more than anyone in the 1950s, more than Gene Autry, Lucille Ball. He also invented the Thesz press, of course. What is now known as the German suplex is actually the belly-to-back waistlock suplex. It became known as the German suplex due to Carl Gotch. The powerbomb and the step-over toe-hold face lock.
Wait, the powerbomb?
That's right. The original powerbomb.
I genuinely thought that was an 80s creation.
No, sir.
Wow.
And in case you needed further proof that Lou Thesz is the greatest wrestler of all time, there are many wrestlers who are Hall of Famers. Ric Flair is a 2-time Hall of Famer. Lou Thesz has a fucking Hall of Fame named after him. The George Tragicos Lou Thesz Hall of Fame in Waterloo, Iowa. So not only is the man a multi-time Hall of Famer, they named not a wing, not an exhibit, they named a Hall of Fame after Lou Thesz.
Now my next question, do they have an actual building?
Yes, they do.
All right, so they're a step up from WWE.
No, it is legit. You can go to Waterloo, Iowa. It is a legit place. The International Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Road trip?
Definitely.
All right, guys. So if anybody wants to call our wives and explain to them why we're going to Iowa and not seeing Slipknot live,
that's why.
Hey, that's the only other Iowa thing I can think of.
That's right.
But.
All right. Going from arguably the greatest champion to the very first champion of wrestling. Professional wrestling goes way back to Egypt and frontier and pioneer days. But there was never an acknowledged world champion until George Hackenschmidt, the Russian Lion. Hackenschmidt toured Europe, dominating in the late 1898. Wow. Yes, it wasn't until officially in 1903 when he defeated the American the American wrestling champion, the great Tom Jenkins, that he was in both a Greco-Roman and catch-style matches. He was officially renowned at that point in 1903 as the world champion. And also keep in mind, Hackenschmidt traveled the world in 1898, 1903 as the world champion. Commercial flights were not available until 1914, and that was flying by Zeppelin. The Model T Ford was not available until 1908.
Wow.
So Hackenschmidt rode by horse and carriage and steamship around the world defending the world championship. He was also an incredible human being. He was a champion from 1903 until 1908 for 5 years. He clean and jerked over 360 pounds. He was one of the pioneers of fitness. an incredibly intelligent man. He also had a just ripped, jacked physique
Oh man.
in the
Okay,
1900s.
you gotta send me these pictures.
We'll post them on the.
I will post them on the Gilmy Talks Facebook page, guys, when I drop this episode. You gotta see these pictures of this guy, especially his trunks.
Fantastic build. Prior to the existence of fitness routines, gyms did not exist. He wrote some of the first books on fitness. He spoke 7 languages: English, Russian, Estonian, which is a old Russian dialect, German, French, Spanish, and Finnish.
And Estonian as a language is very difficult. It's very guttural,
Yes.
if I recall properly.
Yes. He also invented the hack squat and popularized the bench press. He was friends with famous playwright George Bernard Shaw and Harry Houdini.
Wow.
And so he was the first ever world champion. Russian Lion, George Hackenschmidt. Number 3 on the list, the man who defeated our first ever world champion and the man who is arguably the greatest tough guy or wrestler in the history of wrestling, Frank Gotch. Frank Gotch was from Iowa, and he defeated George Hackenschmidt in 1908 in Chicago's Dexter Park Pavilion. 1908, 6,000 people came to watch them wrestle. For over 2 hours they wrestled before Hackenschmidt submitted. So I realize Iron Man matches are incredible. These guys wrestled for over 2 hours in a legit shoot wrestling match, and over 6,000 people came. Once again, cars were not commercially produced yet.
That's crazy.
6,000 people came, walked or took horse and buggy to come see this. And then their September 4th, 1911 rematch, Comiskey Park, drew 33,000 fans in 1911. So a few people had cars,
Yeah.
but most people would be still riding horse and buggy. It was the largest crowd ever for a non-horse racing event at that point. And it drew a gate of over $87,000. And to put that in perspective, $87,000 in 1911 is worth roughly $2.35 million in today's dollars.
So they were laughing all the way to the bank.
The promoters were anyway.
Yeah.
So Frank Gotch defeating the Russian Lion was huge too, because it made America's sport wrestling. The reason there is YMCA have wrestling and wrestling is in every American high school is because of Frank Gotch. He was also undefeated as world champion. He retired undefeated. From 1908 to 1913.
So 5 years traveling the world, and he was undefeated.
Undefeated. He popularized the toe hold. He was invited, and he was like, and it was such a huge deal that he was champion. He was invited to the White House by President Theodore Roosevelt.
Well, he was a big wrestling fan.
Yes.
That's well documented. Go look it up. It is.
That is very true.
Yeah.
His professional record, also once again to put this in perspective, Gotch's professional record was undefeated as champion. Some other devastating, like professional fighters, Mike Tyson was 56-2. Muhammad Ali was 56-5 in professional competition. Butterbean, 77-10-4.
Well, I love that guy.
Even Kurt Angle's amateur record, collegiate record, was 116-10-2. Frank Gotch entire career record was 154-6.
and he never lost a single fall in the last 7 years of his career. So not only in 2 or 3 fall matches, not only did he not lose a match, he never lost a fall.
That is insane.
So probably the toughest man ever in wrestling. And he was, in fact, post-wrestling, was going to run for governor of Minnesota when he died of liver failure.
Minnesota loves electing wrestlers.
They do. They really do.
Yep. Want to run?
Gotta be American.
I know.
Down there. Number 4 on our list. I'm a huge fan, but not as well known as he should be. Vern Gagne. 16-time world champion and 10-time AWA champion. Gagne is overlooked sometimes. He founded the AWA in 1957, and he was the first champion of the company, but people don't realize that other people had broken away from the NWA. No one had been successful breaking away from the NWA prior to Vern Gagne. He had the 3rd longest reign ever as champion. He was AWA champion at one point from August 31st, 1968 until November 8th, 1975 for 2,625 days. So just over 7 years.
Wow.
And you can say, sure, he owned the territory. He keep it on himself. Keep in mind, he still had to get up every day, go out and wrestle. Didn't matter what hurt, how tired he was. And AWA had a god-awful touring schedule.
Oh, yeah. They were northern U.S., right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And wrestling like 30, 60 minutes every night for 7 years.
Well, he kept in really good shape.
Oh, yes. Vern was dominant. And guys talk about, like, Olympians and Kurt Angle, being Olympic gold medalists. And even before Ken Matera, Olympic powerlifter. Mark Henry. Vern was one of the original guys. Vern was on the 1948 Olympic wrestling team for the United States. And he was a 2-time NCAA champion back in 1948 and 1949.
So he could stretch people as well.
Definitely. And jumping to number 5 on the list, Nick Bockwinkel. I love Nick Bockwinkel.
I love this guy.
4-time AWA champion, ended Vern's 7-year run. Nick had a 32-year wrestling career from 1955 till 1987. He was the WCW commissioner in 1994, and he was the president of the Cauliflower Alley Club, which is for wrestling alumni, until May of 2014, when he stepped down due to bad health and unfortunately passed away in November of 2015. So basically, Nick was involved in wrestling his entire life.
And he was also, I would say he was the first true heel.
He really innovated a lot of a certain style. Wearing the expensive suits and we talked about the Horsemen doing that in the 70s. Nick Bockwinkel was wearing fancy suits, big words, and Rolexes in the 50s. And he was also one of the first generational superstars. He was the son of Warren Bockwinkel. So he was a prodigy back before, everybody talks about, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. and all these other guys in the 80s. But once again, 30 years before that, Nick Bockwinkel. He was also big money, making over $100,000 in the 60s. Which once again in today's dollars is equal to roughly $870,000 a year. So a good chunk, a solid chunk, over $750,000 a year.
Yeah, I think he was doing pretty okay.
Yeah, so big time overlooked star once again. Number 6, Ed Strangler Lewis. Ed Lewis was a 4-time world champion back in the 1920s, in the heyday of America.
Now, to describe him, how this is the one that a lot of people probably don't know. How would you describe his wrestling style exactly?
It's a very defensive style. Had matches where they were all very long. He once wrestled Joe Stucker for 5 hours and 20 minutes to a draw. Referee stopped. The third referee, first two referees collapsed from exhaustion. Everyone had left. They were using car lamps to light the ring because it was an outside venue. Both men were rushed to the hospital after. Stucker stayed there for 3 days to recover. But Strangler Lewis was the first celebrity. Like, the other guys were he was the first celebrity world champion. He made his debut in 1905 and wrestled until 1948 actively. First one to have an illegal hold, the stranglehold, which was his version of a sleeper. The first person to really have a illegal hold. Also invited to the White House to meet Teddy Roosevelt. But he spoke at men's clubs and was a very eloquent person as well. So, really the first wrestler to step outside and be known outside the world of wrestling. Number 7, arguably one of the most famous wrestlers of all time, or inspired the most, was Bruno Sammartino. Bruno is the longest reigning champion in the history of wrestling. Bruno's longest reign lasted from May 17th, 1963 until January 18th, 1971 for a total of 2,803 days, or 7 years, 8 months, and 1 day. He defeated the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, who we'll talk about shortly, in 48 seconds with his backbreaker, so that was completely unheard of at the time. Bruno has a record for selling out Madison Square Garden the most times of anyone, and even his second reign as champion was no slouch. From December 10th, 1973 till April 30th, 1977 for 1,273 days, or 3 years, 4 months, and 20 days.
That's crazy.
And Bruno would inspire the likes of Mike Tyson and a who's who of today's modern era of wrestling.
Yeah, because Bruno Sammartino, I think, in my opinion, he's a guy who changed the game of wrestling. He really did over his entire career. Because I think he brought a different style. Because the Bruno match was, I don't want to say fast because that wasn't a Bruno match, but compared to the previous style where you literally grappled for hours.
He took it away from the Greco-Roman style, which was very much more static, more like a chess match than a fight, in the way that baseball differs greatly from football. Number 8 in our list, Dory Funk Jr. Dory Funk is only a one-time NWA champion. However, it is the second longest NWA championship reign in the history of the NWA at 1,563 days, or 4.5 years, from February 11th, 1969 until May 24th, 1973. And even though he's only had it for one time, he's still the 4th longest combined reign of any NWA champion.
Wow.
Dory, of course, son of the great Dory Funk Sr. and brother of the legendary wild man Terry Funk.
Now, how would you compare, for the people who don't know, everyone probably listening, you know Terry. Terry is a much younger brother than Dory. And he's still wrestling. If they would let him, he would still wrestle.
Dory was much more the professional, but equally rugged to Terry. Like, there's sometimes the misconception that Dory wasn't as tough as Terry, and that's not at all true. He was just more controlled than Terry.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure Dory didn't do barbed wire or moonsaults at the age of 50.
No.
No.
I don't think too many people do that, other than like Ganny Murrah and a couple of crazy
PCO.
guys. Yeah. Number 9. Everybody loves Ric Flair. Woo, the Nature Boy. What most people don't realize is the original Nature Boy was Buddy Rogers. Back in his 1939, the bleach blonde, strutting robe wearing Nature Boy was telling everybody he was better.
And everyone hated him.
Oh, yes. The original Nature Boy is only one of 4 people to be both NWA and WWE champion. The other 3 being AJ Styles, Ric Flair, and Christian. The Buddy Rogers strut, which has been emulated by everyone from Ric Flair to Jeff Jarrett to Jesse Ventura. People didn't strut before Buddy Rogers. You didn't strut during a fight. And so Buddy Rogers strutting and slicking back his hair drove people wild. He did popularize the figure 4 leg lock. He did not invent the figure 4 leg lock because the figure 4 is a judo hold that can be applied to any limb. But he did popularize the figure 4. He once wrestled Pat O'Connor at Comiskey Park. It was 38,622 people in June 1961 for an all-time record then. And then he later broke that record in the 80s, the David Vaughn Eric Memorial Show. And of course, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers was the first ever WWF champion back in 1963. And equally amusing fact was he was the first person to win the championship at a tournament in Rio.
I wonder where that happened.
Yes. But so the original Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. And number 10 on our list, Antonio Inoki. 3-time IWGP champion. Now, everybody loves New Japan Wrestling. New Japan. I love New Japan too.
Yeah, same.
So literally, you can't say the world of wrestling would ever be the same without Antonio Inoki because he founded New Japan Wrestling in 1972. So, unspeakable impact on the world of wrestling.
Because without him, you wouldn't have strong style wrestling.
You wouldn't have most of what we have in wrestling today. And Inoki had a legendary career on his own. 3-time IWGP champion. He fought Muhammad Ali in 1976. And outside, also incredible records. He wrestled the North Korean peace ceremony against Ric Flair in 1990. 95 that was, sorry. The day 1 was 150,000 fans, and day 2 was 190,000 people came to see these.
That's insane numbers.
Yes. He was also elected to Japan's House of Councilors. So he was a member of government both in 1989 and then again in 2013. So 15 years apart almost.
That's like Pierre Trudeau right there.
Except good at his job.
Okay, no Canadian politics.
And Inoki, I realize other wrestlers have been mayors and governors. Inoki helped negotiate the release of Japanese hostages during the Gulf War with Saddam Hussein.
Well, I guess everybody listens to Inoki or you're going to get slapped.
Yeah, so an incredible man who had a profound impact that is frequently and tragically overlooked. A few more we're going to just quickly talk about. Honorable mentions, some people that may or may not be talked about, but had some substantial accomplishments that definitely changed the game of wrestling. Harley Race, 8-time NWA champion at a time when people never won the championship more than 2 or 3 times. It was unthinkable to win. Harley had the record forever prior to Ric Flair. People didn't win world titles 8 times. He has the third most combined days as champion with 1,803 days, and is widely considered the toughest man in professional wrestling.
I'd say toughest man. Done.
Yeah. Wrestled 6 nights a week in his era, and like he body slammed Andre the Giant in 1978. So 4 years before Hogan ever thought about. Actually, no, 7 years before Hogan did it. Sorry.
Yep.
He was the King of the Ring in 1986 and wrestled for the last televised AWA championship match in August of 1990. Jack Briscoe was NWA champion from 1973 till 1975, minus 4 days, but he was the first ever Native American NCAA champion in 1965, and the first ever Native American NWA champion in 1973. Also discovered Hulk Hogan.
That's a little thing there.
Yeah, fun little impact. Also mentioned to Farouk, aka Ron Simmons, was the first ever African American NWA champion in 1992 and held the championship for 150 days. Kenji Muta, aka the Great Muta, partially on the list just because I wanted Muta on the list, but fantastic champion in his own right. 22 major titles, 4-time IWGP champion, 3-time All Japan champion, and a former NWA champion. And he's only one of 3 people to held all 3 of those titles. Also invented the Shining Wizard.
And also the Green Mist.
No.
I know.
You just want me to segue to we're going to talk about who invented the mist on another edition.
Oh, yeah.
10 innovators you need to know.
Yep.
And also our final honorable mention going to the Fabulous Moolah. Dominant women's champion, held either the NWA or WWF women's championship pretty much from 1956 until 1983. Was the oldest champion in wrestling history when she won the WWE Women's Championship in 1999 at the age of 76. She was the first woman to wrestle at Madison Square Garden in July 1st, 1972. Wow. She helped repeal the New York State Athletic Commission ban on women's wrestling in New York. Women were not allowed to wrestle in New York prior to
Moolah.
Yep. And she was also the first woman in the WWE Hall of Fame in 1995. And also one of those, that's an interesting fact. She was part of the original Screwjob in November 25th, 1985, when the Spider Lady shockingly upset champion Wendy Richter, and Spider Lady was unmasked to be revealed as Moolah.
Because Moolah was a shooter.
Undoubtedly, probably one of the toughest women in the history of wrestling.
Maybe one of the toughest people.
And so before you send us a bunch of hate mail saying, why didn't you put so-and-so on the list? I'm not saying that anyone not on the list wasn't a great champion. I just feel those people mentioned have been grossly overlooked for their massive contributions to wrestling. And we'll also be covering on a future edition Tom's 10 Innovators You Need to Know. People who are not necessarily champions, but made huge impacts to the business. And of course, we will be back with our usual Talking with Tom segment where we discuss January's wrestling action.
Yeah, because January's another packed month, like always. And of course, I'm just going to plug the show that I'll be going to January 1st. Go to Death Proof Fight Club, Hair of the Dog at the Rock Pile in Etobicoke, 5555 Dundas Street, I believe. West. Dundas
Big
Street
difference.
West. Yes. And I'm going to be there. Will you see me? Come up, say hi.
Prepare to be hugged.
Oh yeah. Thanks Tom.